Welcome, everyone. It's Monday, September 26, 2022. Time for the regularly scheduled city council meeting. I ask the clerk to certify the meeting notice, please.
This meeting has been noticed in accordance with Idaho Code 74-204.
Call the roll, please.
Councilmember Heller,
Present.
Councilmember Jacobs,
Here.
Councilmember Jorgensen. Here. Councilmember Page.
Here. Thank you. Next item is the Pledge of Allegiance. If you'd stand and join me.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Item D is changes to the agenda.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilmember Page.
I move that item number E6 CUPFY 2022-0014 be removed from the consent agenda with no other action being taken at this meeting.
Second. Got a motion and a second. Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, clerk call the roll for the consent agenda. Oh, for removing that. I'm sorry.
Okay. Councilmember Heller,
Yes.
Councilmember Jacobs.
Yes.
Councilmember Jorgensen.
Yes.
Councilmember Page.
Yes.
Thank you. Now I entertain a motion to approve the amended consent agenda.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
I move that we approve the consent agenda as amended.
Second. Got a motion and second. Any discussion? Hearing none, the clerk call the roll.
Councilmember Jacobs.
Yes.
Councilmember Jorgensen.
Yes.
Councilmember Page.
Yes.
Councilmember Heller.
Yes. Thank you. Item F1, Reconnecting Communities Pilot Program Update. Ms. Thornborough is going to brief us on an opportunity with our partners. This is a project that she will explain here in a minute that required a grant match. She presented this to the highway district and they put up enough money to cover the entire match. So I got a direct compliment from the director on the presentation Ms. Thornborough did. So just an FYI to the council. Way to go. So
Thank you, Mayor and members of the council. I might suggest it wasn't me that did the heavy lifting, but I do appreciate the accolades.
that's not right. Go ahead.
The city is a joint partner on a planning grant that will be submitted. It's called Reconnecting Communities Pilot Program, or RCP for short, for Chinden Boulevard within the constraints of Garden City. So from city limit to city limit. It is due with the goal of having it submitted October 11th, but the hard deadline is October 13th. I do know it's not October today, but that's why October is up there. The Reconnecting Communities Pilot Program is a federal program that there will be $1 billion being released through this program over the next 5 years for planning grants specifically. Next year, there will be 50 million made available for planning grants. It is a federal program dedicated to reconnecting communities that have been bisected by principally transportation routes. It does sound like there is some allowance for things such as oil pipelines, et cetera. And the intent is to restore community connectivity through the retrofit of those facilities. We feel that Chinden is a great candidate for that. This slide is something that was done for Garden City a few years back by Vitruvian Planning, just talking about how there is a disconnect if you're trying to walk across Chinden as a resident or trying to access businesses, even if you're not a resident on bike or foot. There have been a number of planning activities on Chinden regarding Chinden over the past, well, I guess 20 some years. Starting really in the files, you can see in 1999, ACHD of all entities provided recommendations for access management, medians and write-ins and write-outs. And why I say ACHD of all entities or all agencies is because Chinden is actually a state corridor and it's not controlled by ACHD. For no other reason than that am I saying that. And then since 2007, there's been quite a bit more active work. In 2006, actually not on the slide, Garden City identified Chinden as being a green boulevard corridor. So reimagining what Chinden could look like and how it could function for the community. There's been high volume intersection studies. In 2015, this section of Chinden was subject of a federal highways analysis of how there are impediments to bike and pedestrian facilities on the road. And that was Idaho's road that was sent back to, at the time, Secretary Fox as a look. And last year we did apply for a RAISE grant, what's called a RAISE grant, for the exact same project, looking at Chinden. How could drainage be addressed? Because that's the first thing that needs to be addressed before we can add sidewalks and other facilities along Chinden. And that one was actually denied. And one of the reasons that it was denied, the feedback that we had received is that when the grant application was reviewed, it did not show regional significance. And so for this grant application, we've really worked on trying to identify partnerships, and ACHD being one such partnership. And this is taken from the presentation, as the mayor mentioned, that was given to ACHD, noting work that they already have, they're already working on that are related to Chinden. Last year, they did an initial look at Osage, and they have it scheduled to continue looking at Osage and how Osage could be utilized, but they're opening that up to also look at Stockton and whether or not that could be a one-way or if bike travel that might otherwise be wanting to be on Chinden could be on those roadways, and just how that could look in general. And then this year, ACHD also received a RAISE grant, and I believe there are 7 projects that directly tie into Chinden and also are in Garden City that they already received the RAISE grant for. The particulars of the grant that would be looked at are identifying alternatives as well as the overall preferred option for a roadway design for Chinden or roadway designs for Chinden, because I suspect 42nd Street might look very different than something by Garrett Street in the design. But looking at how to introduce, or should there be an introduction of bicycle and pedestrian facilities, what the streetscape should look like, any update to transit facilities. A good example of where this is really needed is right in front of the fairgrounds. There's a transit facility, a stop that is completely not ADA compliant. So if you were to try to get to that stop, you'd be right next to a severe grade change with no access to or from that stop. And so updating those so they can actually be utilizable. Where there might be pedestrian crossings and what those could look like without impeding the regional movement of traffic. Again, that access management piece, anytime you have unrestricted access, you increase the number of points of conflict. And so that increases the potential for accidents. And so that access management would be a pretty important piece. And hopefully it would be done in such a way where it wouldn't, not only would it not decrease access to businesses, but would make it more secure. And so during that rush hour, people would feel more secure actually knowing how to get to businesses and not passing them by. And again, probably the biggest component is that drainage component, because without it, we can't do any improvements. The planning documents would include the preliminary streetscape design, cost estimates. For federally funded projects, the environmental review is a huge piece. It's one of the more costly pieces, and so it would do an environmental scan, which would ready the projects to be construction ready. Again, the drainage plan and access management plan. The team that's working on the grant believes that it meets the criteria for the grant application and that it is intending to connect Garden City across Chinden, as well as it would, that would be pertinent for the city of Boise and Ada County as well. And that Chinden bisects some of the regional active corridors is what they're called. So if you're trying to come down off the bench to get to the green belt on a bike, Chinden does separate those bike paths that are designated. It would improve safety for all modes of transportation, including vehicles, motor vehicles. It would address environmental impacts by encouraging non-motorized transportation and introducing tree canopy and remove barriers for those that are historically underserved. The team is still working on this slide, but this is the most exciting slide. As the mayor had already noted, when this presentation was presented to ACHD, there was a match deficit of 60,000 and they provided a match of 60,000 at that time. That same day, we heard from the city of Boise that they intend on committing $10,000 as well. And so we ended up being 30,000 over what we were hoping for per match. When I made the slide, I had put all of that into contingency. The team, especially the ITD side of things, Compass is really looking and getting into the details of the project. They would like to leave at least 2% in contingency, but they're looking at maybe areas that were a little, maybe need to be sussed out just a little bit more before the grant application is put in. The partners include ITD will be the lead, ACHD, these are in alphabetical order, Ada County, City of Boise, Compass, Garden City, and Valley Regional Transit. And then in 2007, after the comprehensive plan identified Chinden as a green boulevard corridor, the city commissioned just a look at what that could look like. And there's a commission rendering of what that could do. And with that, thank you. I stand for any questions.
Questions? We'll get this submitted and we wanted to make it look as good as possible and hopefully we'll get the grant. ITD will get the grant. We'll all get the grant.
Thank you.
Cool for Chinden Boulevard to look like that.
Well, we've got to start somewhere.
Exactly.
Yeah, and so we have, since I've been around, which is a while, we've been struggling with what can happen to Chinden, and it gets back to exactly what Jenna said, and that is, if we don't have the drainage figured out, we can't do much. So on the east end, part of it's got curb and gutter, you know, we got the Davis drain that nobody claims that could be an asset. We've got swales in some spots. A lot of it just runs off to the side and goes wherever. So getting that figured out and how we're going to deal with that incrementally as we see improvements and redevelopment along there is a big deal. So anyway. Okay, thank you. Item F2, Domestic Violence Awareness Month proclamation. I'll read the proclamation into the record. Whereas personal relationships are destroyed through acts of domestic violence, where one member gains control and power over another through physical, emotional, sexual, economic, or psychological actions or threats. And whereas it is important to make people aware that an estimated 1 in 4 women and 1 in 7 men will experience domestic abuse in their lifetime. And whereas victims of domestic violence and their children need the help of strong community partners who can offer help, support, advice, and guidance in times of need. And whereas a range of services and programs exist throughout the Treasure Valley, providing safety, healing, and freedom from domestic abuse and sexual assault, including secure shelters, court advocacy, counseling, childcare, as well as case management. And whereas wearing purple during the month of October can be used as a way to tell others why ending domestic violence is important to you. Now therefore, I, John G. Evans, Mayor of the City of Garden City, Idaho, do hereby proclaim October to be Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and encourage all citizens to speak out against domestic violence and support local efforts to provide help and healing to victims of these crimes. Dated this 26th day of September 2022. Everyone received the staff reports in your packet. They're on page 53. I encourage you to look at those. If you have questions, feel free to contact department heads. Next item on the agenda is item G1. This is the third reading for a small cell ordinance. Mr. Wadums.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the council. I'll be brief because this is the third reading. On page 62 of your packet is my legal memo. On page 67 of your packet is the staff report that was put together by my legal intern, Jessica Stedman. Page 74 is the actual ordinance. It's ordinance 2006-19, as the mayor just said. We did a couple things on that since the second reading last time. We clarified that wireless communication facilities, and those are the macro towers, that's section 46. Section 46 already exists. We just clarified that that's for the macros, clarified that's for the towers that are 50 feet high or taller. And then we clarified that the new section, section 49, is for the small wireless facilities, and those are 50 feet or under. So macros are more than 50, micros are under 50. So we clarified that. On page 75 of your packet, that's the ordinance. We incorporated Crown Castle's requested wording from the last time regarding eligible facility requests, or EFRs. So that's in there now. And so that's really, those were the changes. I think our definitions are solid, and I think that we're pretty solid and pretty clear what is governed by section 46 and what is governed by section 49. And just talking briefly about the eligible facility request, if it is an eligible facility request as defined, then they do not have to go through the MLA process, do not have to comply with the design standards, because they're already existing. And so that is I think that's the law under the FCC. And so I think we clarified that. And then on page 82 of your packet, there's the proposed findings of fact, conclusions of law, and decision with some suggested wording. There's suggested wording for an approval if that's what the council would like to do. There's also some suggested wording if the council wanted to do a denial. I think everything I've heard over the last 3 readings is that we're going with an approval, but there is that I'm going to ask for a motion that the council approve the decision document for approval. You'll see on that decision document that the council could add conditions if the council wanted to. That's the standard template. Staff is not suggesting or recommending any conditions on this application. So that's it, the legal memo, the staff report, the ordinance, and the decision document. With that, I stand for questions.
Thank you. Questions of Mr. Wadums? Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor.
We worked this one pretty good. Yeah. Entertain a motion to instruct the clerk to read the ordinance by title only.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
I move that we ask Madam Clerk to read ordinance CPA FY 2022-0010 for its third reading by title only.
I have a second.
Second.
Got a motion and a second. Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, the clerk call roll.
Councilmember Jorgensen.
Yes.
Councilmember Page.
Yes.
Councilmember Heller.
Yes.
Councilmember Jacobs.
Yes.
Ordinance 1006-19, an ordinance of the City of Garden City, a municipal corporation of the state of Idaho, amending Garden City Code Title 8 Development Code, Chapter 2, Base Zoning District Regulations, Article B, base zoning district provisions, section 2, allowed uses. Article C, land use provisions, adding section 49, small cell facilities, chapter 6, administration. Article A, general provisions, section 2, duties and authorities, section 4, required application information, and chapter 7, references. Article A, definitions, section 1, definition of uses, by amending the language to include provisions for small cells, providing severability, repealing conflicting city code provisions, approving a summary of the ordinance, and providing an effective date.
Thank you. Entertain an action to adopt the findings and facts and conclusions of the law as presented by Mr. Wadums.
I so move.
Second. Got a motion and a second. Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, clerk call the roll.
Councilmember Page,
Yes.
Councilmember Heller,
Yes.
Councilmember Jacobs.
Yes.
Councilmember Jorgensen.
Yes,
And finally, request a motion to adopt and publish the ordinance.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
I move that we adopt and publish ordinance CPA FY 2022-0010.
Second. Got a motion and a second. Is there any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, the clerk call the roll.
Councilmember Heller,
Yes.
Councilmember Jacobs.
Yes.
Councilmember Jorgensen.
yes.
Councilmember Page.
Yes.
Thank you. Motion passes. Okay, that concludes the business on our agenda for this evening. I'd entertain a motion to adjourn.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
I move for adjournment.
Got a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. We stand adjourned.